I'm Batchelor, KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk radio, the 60th anniversary of the Berlin Airlift. The Berlin Airlift, marvelously presented in a wonderful new book, The Candy Bombers, the untold story of the Berlin Airlift in America's finest hour. I agree with that finest hour. Andrei Cherney is the author. Andrei, the Berlin Airlift, 60 years old right now, in late June, news arrives at the Republican convention and then at the White House that the Berlin corridor, the connection between West Germany and Berlin that was inside East Germany, was being cut in an effort by the Soviet Union to blockade and to starve Berlin to submission. This is at the beginning of the Cold War. By mid-July, a man by the name of Halverson, who's a wonderful hero and a flyer in the U.S. Air Force in your book, gets in a C-54 and he flies into Tempelhof Airfield. Who is Halverson, and why is he flying into Tempelhof in mid-July 1948?
Well, 1948, Hal Halverson is a 27-year-old transport pilot, has been in the United States Air Force and his predecessors since the middle part of World War II, really early part of World War II, and had been somebody who had been swept up into that great drama, but was on the outskirts of the headlines, on the outskirts of the battles, had spent World War II not as a flying ace or as a bomber, but as basically a truck driver in the sky, flying planes and supplies from South America over the Atlantic into North Africa and the Azores. And so when, as you said, in July 1948, he is then pulled into the Berlin Airlift, and what has come to be known by July 1948 as the Berlin Airlift, but it's this operation that was basically a way to buy some time when Harry Truman and the others who are involved in the decision-making power in the United States were trying to figure out how do we respond to that blockade that you mentioned? How do we figure out a way to perhaps keep the American options alive while the Soviet Union is cutting off those 2.5 million people in West Berlin?
There was no Marshall Doctrine at this point. The Marshall Plan that rescues Europe was still being debated in Congress. In fact, it was tied up in the Ways and Means. Harry Truman was enormously unpopular.
Absolutely.
Enormously unpopular. And the very popular governor of New York, Dewey, who was famously remarked by Alice Roosevelt Longworth as the groom on the wedding cake, that would be Mr. Dewey,
right,
was supposed to be president. That's why the Republicans were surprised by this news from Berlin. It was seen as a more defeat by Harry Truman, who, after all, had never been elected president, had inherited it from Franklin Roosevelt after his death in the spring of 45. So Halverson knows all this as he's coming into Tempelhof. Does he know at that point that little bitty airfield down there, Tempelhof, is at the center of the potential world war between the Soviet Union and the United States? Is there that awareness in the Air Force at this point?
By that time, he was, because it was clear that if this airlift did not work, if this effort to try to supply the people of West Berlin by air didn't work, then the United States would have one of three choices. Either shoot their way through the blockade, thereby starting World War III, or abandon Berlin and all of the people there and really, by and large, abandon Europe to the Soviets, or let the people of Berlin starve. So this aerial lifeline of these small rickety planes about the size of a school bus was really all the people of Berlin had. And when Halverson in this mid-July is flying into Tempelhof, he is flying into a airbase that is located smack in the middle of downtown Berlin. Its hangar is one of the great achievements, so to speak, of the Hitler architecture. It was then the largest building in the world. But while the terminal building is this really work of enormous architecture, the runways one was made completely of sod, and the other was of steel planks. And so when Halverson is flying these planes, Halverson and the many other pilots who are flying these couple hundred planes that have been gathered from around the world, really all that was left of the American Air Force after World War II.
They pulled in all the C-54s that they had in the inventory. Everything was pulled in.
Just about all of them, exactly. And with the objection of a lot of the Air Force, which didn't want them to do that, but Harry Truman overruled his advisors and said, let's do it. And so they are making an approach over destroyed Berlin, they have to clear a apartment building that is really, unfortunately, one of the few apartment buildings left in Berlin of any size, but this one happens to be located smack right on the edge of the runway.
4 years before, many of these same flyers were tasked to destroy Tempelhof and everything in the neighborhood. That's why everything's flattened except for this one apartment
There's
complex.
One apartment building that now they rue that they did not
right, we missed it that day, right. The graveyard's intact, and then there's the apartment building.
There's apartment building, and so on this very short runway, there's this very tall apartment building, so they have to come in at an incredibly steep angle to hit the runway with enough room to slow down on this short runway. This steel plank runway is really giving way under the weight of this plane after plane that's landing. Before all of this happened, before the airlift and this crisis began, there was only one flight a day going from West Germany to Tempelhof Air Base. Now we're talking a flight every few minutes is taking off or landing, and within a month after mid-July, you're going to have a flight taking off or landing every 90 seconds. So you have women standing, the widows really of Berlin are standing on either side of the runway, and as the planes come in crashing down onto this runway, they wait for the plane to clear and then rush out onto the steel planks, try to fill in the holes with tar, and then rush away again before the next plane lands. So this is a operation that is not, at this point, any great marvel of organization, really a jerry-rigged operation that's being held together just by the most basic kind of exertions.